New Mexico Crime Files, a deep dive into the archives, shocking and notorious cases, the arrests and what led to them, and what happened to the suspect. Here are your hosts, Dean Staley and Jessica Garate. New Mexico Crime Files is sponsored by Medrano Struck Law Firm.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of New Mexico Crime Files. And we're going to focus in on one major big case today. I'm Jessica Garate with KRQE, along with my co-anchor, KRQE's Dean Staley.
Yeah, Jess, this is interesting. We have talked about this. Some of the crimes we do are more petty crimes, police chases, shoplifting, petty theft, and sometimes those can be interesting. But this is the opposite. This is a mega crime that involves public officials.
And it's one of those where it went national. It just gave New Mexico a bad name. And this happened in 2011 when this all unfolded. And back then you just kept seeing these public corruption scandals. And this one was one of them that really topped it.
Yeah, this was shocking. And I think everyone in the newsroom, because we like to talk about that sort of when you hear it in the newsroom, you think, what happened? What does the indictment say? And you can't believe those people were involved. So you're talking about a police chief, you're talking about a mayor, you're talking about basically a city councilor, all involved in this pretty high-level crime.
So this involves gun smuggling and straw purchases that made headlines almost every day back then. In 2011, it hit the national news when it happened in this small little town of Columbus. Federal agents took down 11 people, including a lot of leaders in that little border town. And not only does it stop there, it gets even deeper as we start unraveling this whole case. So let's go ahead and take a look at what exactly happened. Agents say they connected them to the drugs and weapons, and here's a look at how.
The news turned this tiny town upside down. The details spelled out in this 26-page federal indictment that lists the Columbus mayor, the police chief, and a village trustee among the conspirators. 11 defendants accused of buying weapons like these by the dozens and smuggling them across the border.
By accumulating these firearms and conspiring to send them down to Mexico, they've actually put a lot of people into jeopardy.
U.S. Attorney for New Mexico Ken Gonzalez says it's a shocking case that undermines the safety of the people of Columbus.
This is a big blow to every honest elected official.
Luna County Sheriff Raymond Cobos acted quickly, ordering deputies to patrol the streets and urging village officials to shut down the police department while the investigation continues.
I think the best thing is to go under the sheriff's department for the time being till we can straighten some of this out.
According to the federal indictment, throughout the last year, the alleged conspirators helped to smuggle as many as 200 firearms into Mexico, the type of weapons favored by Mexico's violent drug cartels, responsible for the deaths of thousands over the last several years.
Firearms that were found in Mexico were actually traced back to these individuals.
Gonzalez would not say if any of the smuggled firearms were used in any violent crimes in Mexico, but he says the investigation continues. The indictment also claims Police Chief Angelo Vega allowed the use of a department vehicle to help smuggle the weapons and also used his police credentials to buy body armor to be sent to Mexico. Some of the details that have village residents and law enforcement at every level shocked.
It's very disappointing for everyone concerned, particularly the people who live in Columbus. There's a lot of good people that live there that deserve to have a safe community and people leading their communities in a very honest and law-abiding way.
Really a shocking crime. Not only are guns being smuggled out of the U.S. across the border to Mexican cartels, but you have the police chief, a city councilor, and the mayor of this small town all involved. And immediately, and this is true in these small towns, you think, okay, well, we don't have a police department. Like everyone is implicated now, all these higher ups. So immediately you have the sheriff stepping in and saying, well, we'll maintain order until we sort this out. Just a crazy story.
It really is. And then I think the most disturbing too is that you have this, you're trying to keep your border safe, and you do have this threat of cartels right across the border, and that they were helping, that you had officials not protecting you from them, but helping them. and in such a way that it was just really stunning and unbelievable.
Let me share an anecdote. You and I are both friends with Raul Bujanda, who's the head of the FBI here in New Mexico, the special agent in charge. In fact, he just left that position to go into the private sector. But he told me one time, and this is a high-level federal, he's the head of the FBI in the entire state. He tells me, the cartels don't want money. They have so much money, they're burying their money in the desert. What they want are guns. So these guns are more valuable than cash. So it's crazy to think not only is that being, and the guns all come from America. They come from the United States. So it's crazy to think that officials here were facilitating getting the guns into the hands of the cartel, and you think about what those guns are used for.
And then we find out that the ATF had this whole operation where they were, trying to confiscate guns, and some of those guns were still getting in the wrong hands, and it was connected to this case. It made huge headlines. It was the Fast and Furious operation.
Right.
And we're like, what are we doing down there? Like,
right.
We're
and for those,
we're arming them.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, Fast and Furious was this federal idea. Okay, let's put some guns and track where they go. Like, let's put some guns into the system, and then they find out later they lost track of those guns. They get into Mexico, and those guns that were originally supplied by the feds ended up being used in murders and horrible crimes down in Mexico. Yeah.
So looking at what happened with this case, we go back and we see what happened to the mayor, what happened to the counselor, and what happened to the police chief. We're going to have more on that when we come back.
New Mexico Crime Files is sponsored by Medrano Struck Law Firm, New Mexico's trusted personal injury attorneys with nearly 40 years of combined experience, fighting for the justice and compensation you deserve. Call 505-217-2200 or visit MedranoStruckLaw.com today. Let's get back to New Mexico Crime Files.
Welcome back. We're following a major crime here on New Mexico Crime Files that involves gun smuggling from the United States to cartels in Mexico, a cartel especially that was based in Juarez. And in this case, public officials in this small border town, Columbus, New Mexico, are implicated in being part of this ring to move these guns. The mayor, the police chief, and one of the city councilors, the village councilors in this case, all implicated 4 months after the initial bust when the feds come in and arrest these three and implicate 11, it turns out, I think later, more than a dozen people in this case. Mayor Eddie Espinoza pleads guilty to gun smuggling.
And then the guns and federal agents say that they were used by the Mexican cartels and linked to murders. So this was just a huge case. And let's look and see what happened to the mayor of Columbus after this.
See for yourself. This is the loot federal agents seized from this apartment in El Paso, an apartment rented by Columbus Town trustee Blas Gutierrez. A massive pile of federal paperwork filed yesterday details how Gutierrez, Town Mayor Eddie Espinoza, and Police Chief Angelo Vega were buying guns for two Mexican cartels. Feds say the group mainly bought AK-47s and what's known as cop killers, guns that can penetrate a bulletproof vest. When the news broke last week, U.S. Attorney Kenneth Gonzalez said the cartels are willing to pay up for these types of weapons.
There's a lot of money involved in this kind of activity. And so that's got to be the lure for these people to do this.
The feds now say that Police Chief Vega pulled in $20,000 from the gun sales this year alone. Investigators say the group of 11 people involved in the smuggling ring purchased more than 200 guns for the cartels. That's just the amount the feds could confirm during their year-long investigation. Last week, Gonzalez said he couldn't comment on if the guns had been used in crimes. But
firearms that were found in Mexico were actually traced back to these individuals.
Now the documents state the guns were used in at least 8 murders in Juarez and Palomas, which is just 7 minutes over the border from Columbus. ATF agents say guns also turned up after Mexican police busted a kidnapping ring. Federal papers also transcribe phone calls between Trustee Gutierrez and Chief Vega. In one, the men talk about outfitting a town-owned van so they can smuggle 600 pounds of drugs for the cartel. Today, 8 of the people were held without bond. Prosecutors say if they were released, the cartel would come after them and kill them. They also fear innocent people in Columbus would be caught in the crossfire. The 2 women accused in the case are the only ones released on bond.
Former mayor of Columbus, New Mexico, raises the white flag and admits he smuggled guns into Mexico.
Good afternoon. 4 months
months after he was arrested by the feds. Well, he was the mayor of Columbus. Eddie Espinoza has pled guilty to gun smuggling charges. Guns, federal agents say, were used by the Mexican cartels and linked to murders. News 13's Krista Gutierrez is in the Newsplex with details.
And Kim, that guilty plea means Espinoza could face up to 50 years in a federal prison. Now, 30 of those are for the gun smuggling counts. In March, federal agents arrested Espinoza and several others, including Columbus's chief of police and a board trustee. Now, federal documents state the group smuggled more than 200 guns from New Mexico across the border into the streets of Juarez and Palomas. The documents state at times the group used unmarked police cars registered to the New Mexico village to smuggle the guns across the border, and that the illegal operation was going on for more than a year. ATF agents connected some of the guns to at least 8 recent murders in those cities. Yesterday, Espinoza pled guilty to smuggling guns referred to as cop killers in Mexico because the bullets used in those guns can penetrate bulletproof vests. Now, in May, Espinoza stepped down as mayor of the village of Columbus. The board of trustees voted to give him a $700 payoff in exchange for his resignation. Back to you.
Okay, thanks, Crystal. Now, no sentencing date has been set at this point. Now, none of the other suspects in the gun smuggling operation have struck a deal or gone to trial.
Well, Dean, things moved really quickly in this case from the arrest in March of 2011, and by August of that year, all of the main players were pleading guilty in federal court.
Just a few months later now.
And one of the main players, of course, the police chief, Angelo Vega, he was one of the last to get sentenced, and we'll have more on his case coming up.
Yep. Welcome back. So we're talking about this drug smuggling ring that was organized and run by officials in the small village of Columbus, New Mexico, right along the U.S.-Mexico border. Things, as you mentioned, just moved very quickly. We had from the time of the arrest back in March of 2011, 5 months later, all of the principals have already pleaded guilty in this case. The mayor, the police chief, one of the city councilors. And one of the interesting parts about this, during the hearing for the former Columbus police chief, Angelo Vega, it is revealed that this case may, in fact, and we mentioned this earlier, be related to the fast and furious effort of the feds, which was, I think, partly in Arizona, where the feds had introduced firearms into the system, the smuggling system, so that they could track where they went, and then they lost track of those guns and they were used in crimes. I think we find out later that some of the guns that these people in Columbus, about 200 weapons that they moved into Mexico, some of those ended up in murders as well.
And it just had everyone at that time just shaking their heads like, what are we doing? We're trying to track these, and they end up completely in the wrong hands, ended up committing a lot of crimes, were used in a lot of crimes. And so that was revealed during the case for the police chief, as you had mentioned. That was Police Chief Angelo Vega. And during his hearing, that's when all of those details started to come out. And that was one of those where they were trying to protect it a little bit because it was just such a bad look. And how, not only did this happen, but that you had guns provided by the U.S. government going straight to the cartels. So his case plays out in court, and this story is back from August of 2011, showing his hearing.
Prosecutors say the Columbus gun smuggling ring started in October 2010 with village trustee Blas Woody Gutierrez and Mayor Eddie Espinoza, his uncle by marriage. They then approached Police Chief Angelo Vega and asked him to join them in working for the Juarez-based La Línea cartel, a cartel made up of drug traffickers and corrupt police, known to decapitate their rivals, and the same gang that murdered 13 teenagers at a birthday party in Juarez, thinking one of them was an informant. Prosecutors say Vega was paid at least $10 grand for his role. He conducted counter-surveillance, used a village-owned truck to transport firearms into Mexico, pulled over a car of ATF agents at La Línea's request, tried to get the ATF to return firearms to Gutierrez after they were seized, and purchased thousands of dollars of body armor, boots, helmets, and clothing for cartel members, including the leader. Authorities say Gutierrez, Vega, Espinoza, and the 12 others they worked with purchased some 200 firearms from a gun dealer in Chaparral and thousands of rounds of ammunition, handing them over to La Línea. It was also revealed yesterday that 6 of the weapons linked to the group were purchased by straw purchasers in Arizona, leading to suspicion this case is connected to Operation Fast and Furious, The undercover operation by the ATF that allowed thousands of guns to cross into Mexico so agents could see where they ended up. The U.S. Attorney's Office will neither confirm or deny that, saying only they are researching the matter. Well, that probe continues. 13 of the players are locked up, looking at decades in federal prison, some of them upwards of 140 years. The 14th player, Gutierrez's wife Gabrielle, is free on bond. She is the only suspect who hasn't yet made a deal with prosecutors. And the 15th suspect, Ignacio Villalobos, who was making many of the demands to Gutierrez, Espinoza, and Vega, remains on the run.
So some crazy facts that came out of Kim Valles' really well-told story there. The police chief getting $10,000 to essentially be a lookout for the cartel, using a police vehicle, an unmarked police vehicle, to move the guns. I mean, load them up in a police vehicle to move them across the border. Just insane. And then the fact that the police chief in this case tried to get the ATF, which had confiscated some weapons, to give those weapons back.
No, just unbelievable details unfold in this case. And just even thinking about, like, you have here, like, all the connections there. This is a really small town. They're related by marriage, and you have all these, like, different connections. And just being able to go to the police chief and saying, hey, I've got this thing. I think we can pull this off.
Yeah, unbelievable.
And that all of them were okay with it.
Yeah.
And thought they could get away with it.
Crazy. And let me explain to the viewers briefly, in terms of straw purchases, this is something that's absolutely illegal at the federal level. When you say, I want to buy a firearm, and they run a background check, and if you don't have felonies, you can get your firearm. It's pretty simple. Straw purchases are when people go in and buy weapons. They say, I'm buying it. Maybe they have a clean criminal background, so they get the weapon. Maybe you have to wait a day or two for your background, but you get the weapon. Well, what's happening is people are buying 10 and 12 and 15 and 20 guns at a time, and they're not meant for them, and that's illegal. You're supposed to be buying the gun just for you, and you have to sign paperwork saying this is for me. Well, those people turn around and sell the guns. That's essentially when they talk about straw purchases in this crime. That's what they're talking about. People have clean records buying guns with no intention of holding on to those guns and handing them over to these guys to send to the cartel.
And just another thing that really just stands out on this, just thinking back at that time period, it was 2011, and you saw all this video in that story of, like, all these shootouts, and that was like a really heightened time where the cartels were really battling it out for their territories, and so this really fueled a lot of those battles, and were used in some of those battles.
Horrific violence.
And used in homicides.
Yeah. There's another crazy aspect to this, Jess, and that is that one of the people involved in this got tipped off in this case, that the feds were looking into him. In fact, someone asked to meet him at a restaurant, and let me tell you something, and pulled him aside and said, they're tapping your phone, and they're tapping his phone, they're tapping everyone's phones.
And for 2 years after the initial arrest, there had been talks about this leak from the U.S. Attorney's Office. And they finally were able to piece it all together. And how it comes about is really interesting. And this is a story from legendary Dick Niffing from back in 2013.
Danny Burnett was a longtime teacher and superintendent in Carrizozo. Former Columbus Police Chief Angelo Vega was a student of his back in the 80s, and Burnett and his wife became like parents to him. The feds say Danny Burnett tipped off Vega in 2011, telling him ATF agents had tapped Vega's phone, along with the phones of the Columbus mayor and a village trustee. All three of them have already pled guilty to federal charges for running guns to the infamous Juarez drug cartel for money. The feds say those guns were used in at least 8 murders in Mexico. The Columbus officials also helped the cartel run drugs into New Mexico by using the village's police cars and by providing inside information to steer clear of law enforcement. Burnett's wife, Paula, was a chief criminal prosecutor at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Albuquerque. She insists she did not say anything to her husband about the investigation. But a criminal complaint says Danny Burnett told Vega he did get the information from his wife and that she was sick over Vega's involvement. The next day, Danny Burnett met Vega at a restaurant in Albuquerque and told him about the wiretaps and the specifics of one of the intercepted calls. The feds say after that, the phone chatter in Columbus stopped.
Wow.
Just gets deeper
and
deeper.
Yeah.
There were a lot of people that went down for this. We'll start with Eddie Espinoza, the former mayor, sentenced to 51 months in federal prison. In addition, he was ordered to be placed under supervised release for 3 years after he completed his prison term. Blas Gutierrez sentenced to 41 months with 3 years supervised release. And the former police chief, Angelo Vega, he pled, but it was sealed and he had to forfeit property. He faced up to 5 years for his plea deal. There's no record of a sentence in federal court. Federal inmate records show he was released in 2014.
Right. So many people involved. Also, Gabriela Gutierrez. This is the wife of the former village trustee, essentially one of the city councilors of the village, Blas Gutierrez. Gabriela got 2 years for scheming with her husband to buy guns for the cartel. So she also was part of this. Ian Garland, firearms dealer, he got 5 years, and he was involved in the sort of straw purchases. You have to buy the guns from somewhere, even if you buy them legally and you're handing them off, then it becomes a crime. So 5 years for him.
Manuel Ortega was given 5 years for smuggling at least 50 weapons across the border. And 2 straw buyers, Alberto Rivera and Miguel Carrillo, were sentenced to 11 years combined for their roles. In all, prosecutors say the ring shipped nearly 200 guns to Mexican cartels. And the story we just saw, Danny Burnett was sentenced to a year and a day in federal prison.
Right, for tipping someone to the fact that the feds were looking into this whole case. Yeah, crazy.
Another crazy story coming out of New Mexico. Dean.
Every time you pull a crime file off the shelf, Jess, you never know what's inside.
Yeah.
So some crazy details. Yeah.
Well, that does it for this week's episode. And thank you for tuning in. And we hope you'll tune in next week.